Alan Turing. You've definitely heard the name, right? Maybe you saw the movie, or you know he's on the British 50-pound note. But the full story of this man, a genius, a war hero, and a victim, is honestly one of the most powerful and tragic stories of the 20th century. So let's dive in and really get to know the man behind the Enigma. To really get a sense of his impact, you just have to look at this quote. And no, that is not an exaggeration. Turing's work during World War II was absolutely world-changing. He was at the very heart of cracking German codes, and that work directly helped the Allies win the war.
And that, right there, brings us to the huge, central paradox of his life. How on earth does a man who saved millions of lives end up being treated like a criminal by his own government? Well, to understand that, we first have to understand the incredible scale of his genius.
See, long before he was a top-secret codebreaker, Alan Turing was a true visionary. He's widely called the father of theoretical computer science and AI. He was the guy who basically came up with the very ideas of algorithm and computation that make our entire digital world tick. Think about this. Way back in 1936, he dreamed up this theoretical device he called the Turing Machine. It was a model that could basically simulate any computer algorithm's logic. And this wasn't just some abstract thought experiment. No, it became the fundamental blueprint for the modern computer. The very device you're watching this on right now, its DNA goes all the way back to that paper.
So, where did this incredible mind come from? Well, from a super young age, it was obvious Turing was just different. He was a genius operating on a whole other level, and the world around him didn't always get it.
I mean, at just 16 years old, he was already tackling Einstein's work. And his determination, it was off the charts. When a general strike shut down all transport, he just hopped on his bicycle and rode 60 miles by himself just to get to his first day of school. Who does that? But his passion for science wasn't always a good thing in the eyes of his teachers. This quote from his headmaster pretty much says it all. The school was all about the classics, and they just didn't know what to do with a kid who was obsessed with math and science. They basically thought it was a distraction from a real education. Now, a really pivotal and honestly tragic moment in his young life was the sudden death of his best friend and first love, Christopher Morcom. The loss was just devastating, but it also hardened Turing's resolve. He poured all of that grief into the scientific dreams they had shared, feeling like he had to carry on the work they were both so passionate about. And that drive, it was about to be put to the ultimate test. As World War II exploded across Europe, Turing showed up at Bletchley Park, Britain's top-secret code-breaking headquarters, ready to face the greatest challenge of his life. The main target was the infamous Enigma machine. This thing encrypted German military communications with a complexity that was just mind-boggling for the time. Breaking the Enigma codes every single day was absolutely vital to knowing what the enemy was planning, especially for winning the Battle of the Atlantic.
So Turing's solution was this electromechanical wonder called the Bombe. Here's the genius of how it worked. They'd start with a guessed piece of German text. They called it a crib. The Bombe would then churn through thousands of possible Enigma settings, testing them against that crib. Whenever it found a logical contradiction, like a letter being encrypted as itself, which Enigma couldn't do, it would instantly discard that setting and move on. This thing just massively sped up the hunt for the right daily key.
Now, it's really important to say he was building on some brilliant work done by Polish codebreakers before the war, but Turing's Bombe became the workhorse that broke Enigma, and the scale was just immense. By the end of the war, just imagine, over 200 of these machines clattering away 24/7. So what did all this actually do? Well, the official war historian Harry Hinsley later estimated that the work done at Bletchley Park, led by Turing's breakthroughs, shortened the war in Europe by more than 2 years. Just stop and let that sink in for a second. More than 2 years. We're talking millions of lives saved. So, the war's over. Turing is a hero. But of course, nobody can know it. It's all top secret. So what does he do? He goes right back to his first love, designing the future of computing. Over at the National Physical Laboratory, he drafted the plans for what he called the Automatic Computing Engine, or ACE. And this wasn't just theory anymore. This was one of the world's first detailed designs for a stored program computer, the kind of machine that powers our entire world today. But for Turing, it wasn't just about crunching numbers. He was fascinated by intelligence itself. He started wrestling with this huge question, a question that was pure science fiction at the time, but is the question that completely defines our modern world.
To try and answer that, he proposed what we now call the Turing test. And the idea is actually pretty simple, but it's so profound. A machine could be considered to think, he argued, if it could have a conversation with a person, and that person couldn't tell if they were talking to a machine or another human. That idea is still a cornerstone of AI philosophy today.
So, you've got the father of AI, a legitimate war hero. Alan Turing should have been celebrated as one of Britain's greatest minds, a national treasure. Instead, the country he literally saved turned on him with horrifying cruelty.
I mean, just look at this brutal contrast. On one hand, a national hero who saved millions of lives. On the other, a convicted criminal. And why? Because in the paranoid Cold War atmosphere of 1952, Turing was prosecuted for gross indecency. His crime was being a gay man.
And his punishment, it's just sickening. He was given a choice, go to prison or undergo a so-called chemical castration with synthetic hormones. He chose the treatment. The effects were devastating, both physically and psychologically. 2 years later, at just 41 years old, he was dead from cyanide poisoning in what was ruled a suicide.
For decades, his tragic end and his massive contributions were all but buried, hidden behind secrecy and shame. But eventually, history began the slow, painful process of trying to right this terrible, terrible wrong.
And you can see it happen step by step. It wasn't until 2009 that the British Prime Minister formally apologized for his appalling treatment. In 2013, he finally received a posthumous royal pardon. Then, in 2017, the Alan Turing Law pardoned thousands of other men who suffered the same injustice. And finally, in 2021, his face was placed on the $50 note, a powerful, if very late, symbol of national recognition.
Today, Turing is celebrated in the way he always should have been. You'll find plaques where he lived and worked. There are statues that honor his genius. His name is finally synonymous with innovation, computing, and the quiet heroism that changed the course of history.
But his story leaves us with this haunting question, doesn't it? Turing was eventually recognized, but only decades too late. And it just forces you to wonder, what other brilliance has the world been deprived of? What human potential has been extinguished simply because society couldn't see past its own prejudice?